Alterology and A is A, on the unavoidability of A is A in becoming, trouble of autonomous A is A outside becoming, and possibility of alterological being, as featured in Reconstructing A is A and inspired by Alex Ebert. It is no secret that I am critical of the ontology and epistemology of A is A, which aligns me with thinkers like Hegel and Alfred Korzybski. But I want to take a moment here to suggest that my emphasis against A is A, as I say for short, and that's with the A/A, is mainly an emphasis on autonomous A is A, which is to say A is A as a standalone outside a doctrine of becoming, or A equals B, to allude to Hegel. I use the language of A is A and, A/A and A/B for short, and that too could cause confusion, how tricky language can be. And I'm sure that overall I create the impression that I think A is A is always and without exception bad. In this work, I hope to clarify my view. Like being, A is A is unavoidable and fine within a dialectic of becoming, and I have a hyphen between be and coming. But unfortunately, we are so naturally toward being that we easily fall into autonomous being, which causes pathological effacement. Furthermore, I consider possibilities of ultimate being, with capital U, capital B, or some ultimate A is A, as topics of what I call alterology, under which fall subjects like theology, psychedelics, speculative futurism, and so on. And regarding alterology, I try to bracket that out from philosophy. I also emphasize the problems with A is A because I believe it is increasingly hard for us to avoid autonomous A is A, which is natural, subconscious, and causes trouble. The original paper which captured my thinking on A is A is found in On A is A, around which my epistemology is constructed. I believe what I write in this new work is consistent with my thinking found there, and please note that I don't always use the equal sign to describe A as A, for I think it can risk clarity, but I have indeed used the symbol here. Section 1. I associate A as A with being, and so I'm sure that it also seems like I think being is always bad, when really A is unavoidable and fine within an ontology of becoming. The problem is isolated or autonomous being. This is an effacement. Though I don't always explicitly say it, becoming is a negation sublation of being into becoming. And that's with the B hyphen coming, which means there is being in becoming, just not the other way around. The first things first principle from C.S. Lewis could prove useful here. If we put becoming first, we get being too. If we put AB first, we get AA as well. But if we put being first, we lose both. If we put AA first, we lose both AA and AB. There is indeed an A in AB, as there is a B in the word becoming. And I have been tempted to write in my works the word becoming as always becoming, with the hyphen, or becoming with the B in parentheses. But that proved far too clumsy. Similarly, I have been tempted to write Schrodinger-esque A is A, all of that in parentheses, /B instead of AB, but that too is bulky and visually odd. Hence, I have sided with a smoother language at risk of being misinterpreted. The map is not the territory, and we must always make trade-offs, risking technical accuracy. We cannot escape experiencing the world and thinking in terms of being. If I literally tried to avoid all language or experience which manifests to me like being, life would be incomprehensible. I must engage with A as A, and that is perfectly fine, as long as I never forget that this A as A is within AB. But unfortunately, my brain naturally forgets this and treats the world as if the universe can be understood in terms of autonomous A as A, which can be associated with the problematic autonomous rationality described in Deconstructing Common Life regarding David Hume. There is a tragedy and fallenness to life in the sense that we must experience the world in terms of A as A and cannot escape this. But there's also a sense in which we can redeem this fallenness by situating A as A within AB, becoming. I reference it often, but I think the section on Deleuze from the Future Trilogy by Mr. Bards and Soter Christ helps articulate this tragedy. We can associate eternalism with being and mobilism with becoming. And to quote the trilogy, Deleuze is an impassionate immanence philosopher and wants at all costs to avoid what he perceives as concessions to eternalism. Despite this, he himself is forced to make a considerable concession in the Nietzschean sense when he, like all other philosophers for that matter, is forced to put his thinking into words in order to structure and, in due course, communicate it. No matter how mobilistic Deleuzeism may be within Deleuze's own brain, even if this cannot be fully thought through either, because verbal reflections has been deeply involved in the formation of thought, it is still transformed into an eternalist phenomenon, among others, as soon as it is formulated in language. Philosophy as a discipline, unlike art and possibly poetry, can never itself be mobilistic. Mobilism is basically becoming, and the point is that we cannot live purely in terms of becoming. We must deal with being and eternalism. Of course, this is problematic because that means we are always at risk of forgetting that we are A, B, and hence live according to autonomous A as A, which would be a pathological effacement. Because all of our experience in daily life is perpetually in the business of taking things in according to A as A, I myself place a great emphasis on stressing A, B. But this does not mean I don't think A as A is necessary or even valid within AB. Still, I no doubt create the impression that I think A as A is always bad. And indeed, autonomous A as A is bad, in the same way I think autonomous rationality is bad. But that doesn't mean A as A, being rationality and the like, are always bad and cannot be conditionally good. Indeed, A as A has its tragic place within AB. Section 2. Though I use the language of AB, it is very important to realize that my understanding of what A as A must mean in order to not be an effacement is the following, as taken from the paper on A as A by O.G. Rose. So in logic, it's A / parentheses, A isn't A, is A / parentheses, A isn't A, and then parentheses without B. In ontology, it's going to be A being A isn't A, is A being parentheses A is an A, parentheses without B. And I understand it's difficult to verbally communicate, so please see the paper. This is featured in Section 3, Understanding of Reconstructing A as A, Part 1. But the idea is that things must be themselves while simultaneously not being themselves, while toward being their full, undifferentiated selves, achievable or not. This fuller take on A as A is what I am pointing to whenever I use the language of AB or A equals B, and when I critique AA, I am critiquing the idea that things are just what they are. To put it simply, I'm critiquing the idea that a cat is a cat. That's going to be a problematic effacement. For me, if A is valid, it has to mean parentheses, A doesn't equal A, close the parentheses, equals parentheses, A doesn't equal A, close the parentheses, and then outside of the double apostrophes around that, you're going to have without A is A. So you could say the unisolatable cat, if we're saying a cat is a cat, so you could say the unisolatable cat equals the unisolatable cat, without the cat in the fullness of its being. To say that things are never fully themselves means things all entail essential otherness, which is an idea we find in Hegel, notably between self-consciousness and reason. Things are always toward the fullness of their identities, whether at the end of time and or in thought, but they never in finitude find themselves being their fullness. There is always something more which is lacking. To put this another way, when I critique the doctrine of being, I am critiquing isolating being outside of becoming. Becoming entails being, but being doesn't entail becoming. Critically, this means being cannot be ignored entirely. If we do, then we will be missing the A we need for our AB. Our becoming will only be a coming with nothing to arrive/process. We must not skip the work of being, per se, in becoming, though we might think we can when we emphasize AB over AA. In Hegel, scientific thinking and empiricism, for example, are parts of what Dr. Goodell calls the phenomenological journey, which is to say they are necessary stages in the development of the subject toward absolute knowing. Similarly, being and AA are necessary considerations of becoming and AB, which is to say we must take seriously how things present themselves in phenomenological experience. Skills of identification, of avoiding logical contradiction, a clarification Dr. Todd McGowan stresses in his work, in contrast to ontological contradiction, which then leads into new logic, of taking seriously what is now, These are abilities we must master before and in AB. This paper is not arguing AA is something we must entirely avoid, but something which is always incomplete unto itself and a source of effacement when autonomous. We must do the work of being if we are to step seriously and well into becoming. Again, there is AA in AB, but not AB in AA. Consider A equals A without A equals B, which another term would be autonomous being equals effacement, which is bad. But A equals A within A equals B, or becoming equals negation sublation, which is good. All right, but wait. If becoming entails being, doesn't that mean we aren't lacking? The idea of lack permeates O.G. Rose. See the Philosophy of Lack series with Cadell last, Tim Adlin, and Alex Ebert. And how can I say subjects are fundamentally lacking if they entail being? Well, it is because we must always lack a final stage of being, which would be a state of autonomous being, free of conditionality, change, contingency, and wholeness. Furthermore, we lack the possibility of ever being done with thinking, existential tension, final wholeness, and the like, at least infinitude, leaving theological possibilities aside. In other words, we lack the possibility of a non-tragic being, which is a being that isn't concealing us from the reality of becoming and mobilism. To put it more directly, I am against autonomous A is A in epistemology, final A is A in ontology, whereas I bracket out from my philosophy alterological A is A. Oh boy, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that I bracket out from my philosophy a transcendent being, an infinite being, an ultimate being, stuff like that. Not because there can't be some ultimate being like God or a higher dimension, but because I personally try to maintain hard distinctions in my thinking, not that I always succeed. And in my view, the topic of ultimate being is a topic not of philosophy, but of what I call alterology. What do I mean by this? I mean the study of alternative ontologies. Section 3. In the past, philosophers would work hard to define philosophy from theology and to keep the fields distinct. And that's basically all I'm doing here. However, I hesitate to talk about theology exclusively, or to use that word, because today the avenues of exploring alternative ontologies have expanded from religion into psychedelics, general spirituality, and technology. The word theology doesn't capture these other fields, which is why I think a new term is needed. I considered using transology, or the study of transcendences, but transcendence can sound like we're talking about something beyond materiality, when such doesn't have to be the case with alterology. Again, I'm increasingly convinced new language is needed. Language I will put under the category of alterology, the study of alternatives, mainly in the realm of ontology and transcendence. What falls under alterology? So here we have a short column. We have alterology. Under it is theology, technological singularity, psychedelics, mysticism, and I'm sure many more can be added. These are just ones that came to mind, and so on. I'm not saying these fields are false or don't deserve thought. My only point is that I personally try to bracket out alterology from my philosophy, which means I emphasize AB. That said, I'm highly skeptical of all alterology that tries to give humans the possibility of permanently achieving ultimate or alterological AA infinitude. Perhaps there are moments in which humans can glimpse an alterological AA, say in intercourse, psychedelics, or visions, but for me, that is very different from suggesting humans can live in a permanent state of alterological AA, or should. I have no doubt that one day humanity could invent a pleasure machine which could simulate a perpetual state of alterological AA. But I am against this, for I think it will necessarily have to efface difference and cause isolationism. We could say I am against autonomous finite being, finite AA, while I bracket out ultimate infinite being, or infinite AA. But again, this is language I hesitate to use, it being so loaded. I also don't think a philosophy of lack, or my philosophy in general, is necessarily anti-ultimate infinite being or anti-alterological, though certainly a philosophy of lack doesn't have to point to a ultimate infinite being. It's a Kierkegaardian either or. Now, even if in some sense we do eventually reach ultimate being, say after death, theology, or thanks to psychedelic experience, New Age, I think it is important to keep these considerations bracketed out from philosophy as a field, even if real and possible. Because otherwise, I think we, as finite humans, will easily start to think that we're capable of achieving alterological being, and that is what I am hesitant of us thinking. If there is a God, I want that God to be who brings us ultimate being. I want us radically humbled. I take fallenness very seriously. If we can glimpse ultimate being in psychedelics, I want us to keep the experience as glimpses, as I want us to avoid engineering a technological ultimate being, because I think that's just going to lead us into encountering a creature out of Lovecraft. Though if approaching the singularity is inevitable, we better quickly start figuring out how to engineer a technological harmony instead as discussed with Dr. Last in O.G. Rose Conversation number 60. We could list out my thinking as follows. An alterological or human AA, which is engineered, sought, and so on by humans, well, this is effacement and this is bad. This is the temptation for a big other. Next, we have an alterological AA that isn't engineered, permanently sought, and so on by humans, and that's fine. This is a possibility that I personally don't oppose as long as it stays distinct from philosophy in alterology. To put this another way, in my view, finite being equals effacement, while finite becoming equals A/A in parentheses /B, that's going to be a negation sublation. Ultimate being, or infinite AA, is not inherently an effacement, but must be outside finitude and the agency placed outside humanity. For me, whether there's some alterological being or not, either way, we practically and in finitude must live according to AB. My hope is that my philosophy doesn't suggest that an alterological being is impossible. I leave that up to my readers to decide, but I also don't want my philosophy to necessarily blur with alterology. My hope is to maintain distinctions. Classically, philosophy has had to define itself with and against theology and found itself having to arrive at three distinctions: philosophy, philosophical theology, and theology. It could be said I want to do something similar. You could say we have philosophy, philosophical alterology, and alterology. Now, a critical question is if metaphysics can bring a movement from philosophy into philosophical alterology, and if physical alterology can then move into alterology. I don't know. And admittedly, the line between what my philosophy and metaphysics is very thin, and indeed the categories profoundly overlap. And indeed, I think metaphysics is unavoidable, but metaphysics is not identical with philosophical alterology, no more than metaphysics must be theological. For me, the above suggests that the only grounds for discussing a capitalized autonomous AA requires alterology, but alterology must be kept strictly separate from philosophy, and also for me this means the only possibly valid alterology is one that strictly respects humans as entailing an inherent fallenness. This doesn't mean there cannot be philosophical arguments made pointing to ultimate AA, but that would likely be philosophical alterology, and even that is distinct from philosophy. It is easily possible that arguments can be made which prove the possibility of transitioning from philosophy to philosophical alterology, but the likelihood of us successfully entertaining such arguments is very low. In my view, if we fail to maintain the categorical distinctions I have mentioned, it is simply too likely that we'll entertain alterology while we think we're doing philosophy and thus do both poorly. Still, the following is possible. So philosophy, which must stay AB, could transition to philosophical alterology, which could point to ultimate AA, but we must stay in AB, to alterology. If we can then make it here, then from here we can consider ultimate AA and finite B in light of the ultimate AA. So anyway, it may be possible to make arguments that go from philosophy to philosophical alterology and to alterology. But it's going to be very important to maintain distinctions between those categories. From the standpoint of alterology, philosophy can then be reconsidered, but only from within alterology. We must maintain that reconsideration only within alterology, like Dante looking back down over creation from heaven, but realizing what he sees only applies while in heaven and relative to that standpoint. This is very difficult to do, I think, and I think it is also hard not to fall into escapist alterology, as has occurred with many religions. But it is still the case that alterology doesn't necessarily become escapist, and thus can be a valid field of study and consideration. Lastly, it should be noted that for those who believe they make it from philosophy to alterology, it will seem as if they were always doing alterology, and that thus philosophy and alterology are equivalent. I think this has happened often classically with theology, where thinkers believe they successfully transitioned from philosophy to philosophical theology and into theology, and that thus they were always just doing theology. This is what I call a flip moment, and it greatly contributes to the difficulty of maintaining these distinctions. Still, I think realizing the role of a flip moment in all this, as well as the distinctions, is paramount for us to efficiently engage in deep thinking. In conclusion, I would sum up my perspective as follows. Autonomous A is A, autonomous being is effacement. A is A in AB, dialectical being in becoming, that's fine and unavoidable. AB without AA, that's actually autonomous becoming, and that's not practically possible because at the very least we must think and experience AA, and one could think about that Future trilogy, quote, with Deleuze. And then in parentheses, yes, we can emphasize that becoming is more real than being, but I think we have to be careful with the language that suggests being is an illusion. Personally, this is why I try to avoid the language of illusion in favor of incompleteness. And then lastly, ultimate AA, transcendent and unified being, that's fine if it's strictly kept in alterology. If strictly dealing with philosophy, AA must be autonomous being, and that is what I am against. Since we are stuck in finitude and the truism of the rational is a philosophical series, then this trilogy will emphasize A is A as problematic. But that doesn't mean an alterological AA is impossible. It's just another topic for another line of work. In alterology, ultimate being is possible, but I personally think ultimate being is outside the immediate scope of philosophy. Yes, philosophy can perhaps make arguments to transition into philosophical alterology and then from there into alterology, but if we are strictly dealing with philosophy, I think the topic of ultimate AA must be bracketed out. This does not mean AA is true or false. This does not mean ultimate AA is true or false, only that I try to maintain strict distinctions, though I realize this isn't easy because if one believes in ultimate AA, that works backwards and entails philosophical implications. Still, at least in the truism of the rational, I will maintain the distinctions best I can, though I do not promise that you will never find me doing work in alterology. My hope is only to be justified in any direction my thought might develop, though I will leave it to others to decide if I succeed in this endeavor. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Anchor, and thank you so much for your time.